Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and strength coach, and you are on the Steady Coach. Today, I am so excited to bring you this follow up interview with Julie, whose success story has been one of my most viewed videos on my channel. And we decided to do a follow up interview just to check in on her, see how she's doing, and let her share more about what her recovery has looked like since we last spoke in January. So, in this interview, Julie will tell you all about how she's been doing, and she is going to drop a whole lot of knowledge on you and give you lots of practical tips for how to continue to recover if you're still suffering from chronic dizziness. So please enjoy this interview. And as always, if you have questions or comments, please drop them in the comments below. And I'd greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel, like this video, and share it if you enjoy it. All right, Julie, we're live. And thank you so much for agreeing to come back on and catch us up.
Well, thank you for being here. Exciting. Love seeing you and just chatting. So thank you for having me.
I'm pretty sure we could have talked for at least an hour before I actually hit the record button.
On a million different things. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate us at least revisiting chronic dizziness for a few minutes here for those who want to know. So, when we last spoke in January, you self-described as being about 95% recovered.
Yes.
And you had realized by that point this was a mind-body thing, that this was related to the alarm signals in your body.
Yep.
And once you realized that, you started to put into practice some of the techniques you already knew, and you were starting to see a huge change in your symptoms and in your ability to live your life. So why don't you catch us up on what you've been up to since then, and maybe starting with symptoms?
Sure.
Just for people who are interested.
Yeah. I've been doing great. I've had maybe a handful, if you could even say that, of fleeting symptoms. Maybe I'm in the kitchen moving really fast and I'll feel my head spin just a bit, but it's seconds and it doesn't last. And it's only been a handful of times. But I will say, which I think is really, really important, and this is, I think people have a lot of fear, and I totally understand that. If those tiny little microseconds of some of, the old symptom that, slowly or just pops up really quick, if I were to have reacted to that split second moment with fear or frustration, or just reacted to it emotionally, like, for sure, I can guarantee that the symptoms would have maybe stuck around a little longer, or I would have had a flare up. So it's really, truly, in my opinion, from my experience with chronic pain and my experience with this chronic dizziness, that's how you react to those sensations. And I know that it sounds, I don't want to make it sound simplistic, because our body naturally just sort of automatically reacts, right? Because it's so intertwined with the nervous system. So we can have especially when our nervous system is hypersensitive and amplified, our body will just automatically react. But it's what you do after that, which is important. So even if your body's automatically reacting, and I remember my body would just be like a flash of panic or something when I was in the thick of it, with pain and the dizziness. And it was to unravel that pattern, because it just became a pattern, right? The brain was just so quick, and the nervous system so quick to respond to a threat. I had to start by just changing how I responded after my body reacted. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I hear this a lot in comments. But how do I stop being afraid when I have that physical response right away? So what you're saying is you can't help that, but you can help what happens immediately afterwards.
Yeah. It's equivalent to, I think I talked about Claire Weeks last time I was on. And she talks about first fear and second fear.
Mhm.
And the first fear is your body's natural response to a threat. And it's become really efficient by the time you have persistent or chronic symptoms. It's become very, very efficient at
Mhm.
reacting.
Mhm.
But it's the second fear that you have more control over. So it's responding after your body reacts. And
Mhm.
what are you going to do right after that?
Mhm.
That's really important. At least that's what I found, not just for dizziness, but for chronic pain, for anxiety symptoms. All of those are all, to me, they're all the same. They're all in the same pool, if
Mhm.
you say. And then it's not about a different tool for each one of these different things, right? It's really truly how you're reacting. Um, the one thing I'll say is I just spoke with someone recently that had some chronic dizziness, and one of her biggest fears was having symptoms for a certain amount of time. Like she had symptoms for, a certain amount of time, and the fear of like, I've had these for so long, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any way that I'm still going to be able to recover?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's another normal natural fear that we have in recovery is like, well, I've had these for so long,
My
maybe
brain can't possibly
there's no
learn.
hope for me, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think it's really important to remind people that it doesn't matter how long you've had symptoms. You still have the ability to recover. The brain can still rewire. The nervous system can still reshape.
Agreed.
Um,
Big time. And
and
that I've seen that in my practice. I mean,
mhm,
I don't really care how long someone's had the symptoms. It
yep,
it does that doesn't phase me at all. It's like you're saying, it's all about how much does someone accept the idea that this truly is a nervous system
yeah,
dysfunction
right,
situation.
yep, yeah, exactly. So I think it's these are reminders in the beginning are really important for people because
Mhm.
everything that they're doing is from a place of fear or frustration.
Mhm.
That's the other thing that I see a lot of times in with clients is they come they come to you with a lot of fear, right?
Mhm.
And then the fear starts to subside once they understand what's happening in the brain and the nervous system.
Mhm.
But then frustration starts to kick in.
Oh, big time.
And
Mhm.
so maybe they're no longer fearful of the symptoms, but they're frustrated by them because they're still there.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so fear and frustration again are in the same little pool. I mean, they're the same. It's the same reaction to those sensations, and it's about changing your reaction to the second fear, if you will.
And I'd love to hone in on what you just said for a moment. So
Mm-hmm.
many questions after everything you said, so many directions we can go, but I think there's a misconception that when we say you can change that second fear or you can change that second reaction, that what we're telling people is to emotionally bypass and to just
Oh,
think
right.
positive or
Mm-hmm.
instead of focusing on the negative, think about what you want it to look like or just something kind of to that end. So what are your thoughts on that? What might that second fear change look like? Like how might someone react differently?
Yeah, exactly. So, in my experience, recovering from dizziness and chronic pain and anxiety and OCD, um, I used really the same tools and I wasn't bypassing the emotions. I was actually doing the opposite. I was what I call accepting and allowing them to be there. So
Mhm.
rather than trying to push them away, which bypassing with positivity is a form of avoidance or pushing away, right?
Mhm.
Um, we either resist, react, or avoid physical sensations, and that's a form of one of those. So instead, for me, based off my experience with anxiety and OCD, I knew that trying to avoid those things wasn't going to work. It's going to reinforce the exact thing you're trying to, you know, move away from.
Right.
And I needed to do the opposite. Recovery is a lot of opposite action. And it's very counterintuitive, which I think really can confuse people because it's going against your natural instinct to get rid of symptoms and feel more balanced or feel less pain, right?
Nailing it. Yep.
And so, but we actually need to expose ourselves or use these opposite actions in order for the brain and nervous system to see that we're safe. So accepting, allowing are the two words that I use. And it's not just a body-based action, it's mind-body action, right? So it's coming to terms with the fact, to me, acceptance is, this is where I am right here, right now. I can't change these symptoms in a split second. This is where I am. And I am no longer going to fight how I feel, try to force it away, push it away, avoid it, right? Whether that's done through, positivity or not moving at all. When you have
Right.
dizziness, the
Avoiding.
last thing you want to do is move. You're avoiding.
Mhm.
Resisting it, or reacting to it with the same fear, frustration. And then in terms of, and usually people understand that piece of it. Okay, I get that, even though that's challenging because it's a
Mhm.
form of surrender in a sense, and people believe acceptance is resignation.
That's so
And
right.
and
Right.
it's not resignation at all. You're simply letting go of the fight. You're simply letting go of trying to control, the symptoms that you're feeling, sensations in your body. And then allowing is the second part of that. And allowing is a release to me. It was letting the sensations exist for the time being while I'm, you know, uh, doing things during my day, right? Like it can be hard to describe, because it's such a, it's an action. Some of the ways that I encourage my clients to use this technique, and it's very similar, because I know we just talked about, you had Dan Buglio on.
Mhm.
He talks about indifference, right? And
Mhm.
it's basically the same thing as
Mhm.
indifference. I don't use that term as much because a lot of people think indifference is ignoring,
Right. Right.
and it can be troublesome. And so I say allowing. So you're giving those sensations permission to exist temporarily or for the time being while you're moving through your day, is what I say, right?
Mhm.
So if you, for example, if you're doing the dishes and putting dishes in the dishwasher, which can be a very triggering experience for people with dizziness, you're going to, instead of fighting that feeling by maybe how do we fight? We tense up in our body, right? That's a natural reaction to trauma, to anything chronic, to any kind of threat.
Mhm.
So our body goes into, just armors up. And so for me, one of the ways I allowed was letting go of that armor. Now it was instinctual, like it happened automatically.
So you'd
Um,
be loading up the dishwasher and you'd
and
notice
and
tension.
I'd feel really tense, like tight,
Uh-huh.
and I'm guarding, right? I'm
Mhm.
guarding against. I'm trying to protect myself. These aren't inherently bad
Mhm.
behaviors. They're behaviors that we use to cope. Your
Mhm.
nervous system is trying to protect you, right?
Mhm.
Based on a perceived threat. But once you understand that the dizziness is not a threat,
Mhm.
a true threat, you start to unravel that. And once you understand that, then you release some of that tension. So, but my
Mhm.
body would still react,
Mhm.
and it would still just start to armor up. And so then what I did was an opposite action, which was counterintuitive. I purposely let my muscles just go, like
Mhm.
purposely relaxed my muscles, like in an extreme way, right?
Mhm.
Like I
Like
just let my,
limp noodle. I
oh, like
call
a
it
limp noodle,
noodle.
like a
Yeah.
spaghetti noodle, right?
Yeah.
Or a rag doll.
Mhm.
And I did, and I remember doing that. And I remember, with dizziness, because that was just recent, but with chronic pain, I had for 2 years. And so that was a neural pathway that had been built for a while. And I remember I would relax it. And then without even realizing it, like a second later, it would go right back into tension. And I felt like I was, bobbing up and down out of water, because I'd relax it. And then it would tense up, and I'd relax it, and then it would tense up. And so I really needed to be, purposeful, right?
Mhm.
And intentional and conscious. and relax my body as much as I could. And then, and so that's part of, to me, that's part of allowing, because if you are allowing, right, or if you were already safe, your body wouldn't be tense, right? And really, in essence, what we're teaching the nervous system and the brain is that there's no longer a threat
Mhm.
there. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I have again, so many ways we could take this conversation. So again, in keeping with the fact that I'm really interested in your experience, because I think a lot of people are going to be interested in your experience. When you would say unload the dishwasher and that would happen and you would tense up and you would relax, that didn't change the symptoms in the moment, right? So
No,
not
yes,
necessarily.
such a good
Right.
point. Yeah,
Right.
and that's where outcome independence comes in. Alan Gordon talks about that in his book The Way Out, and on his podcast, which I know you're, you know,
Mhm.
a big fan of him. And it's, so I think, and he talks about changing our goal. It's not, and this is challenging when we have symptoms, because ultimately our goal is to be without them, right?
Mhm.
But that can really put a lot of pressure on us. And
Mhm.
pressure, again, another thing that precedes symptoms and
Mhm.
often keeps us stuck in them. So letting go of that, and knowing that you're going to be experiencing symptoms for the time being. And actually, we need to while we're doing new actions, because that's where all the rewiring takes place. That's where all
Right.
the reshaping takes place.
Right. Exactly. And this is, I mean, if you've ever gone to physical therapy, if it feels easy, what are you accomplishing? You're not really changing anything, right? So we need your brain to start to pair the two things, the I'm safe message with the oh my gosh, this is a sensation
Exactly.
message.
Yeah. And oh, go ahead.
Go
What were you
ahead.
going to
No,
say?
go ahead.
I was just going to say that this is where, again, where I think people get kind of tripped up a little bit, because we're doing two things at once. We're unlearning old behaviors while creating new ones.
Mhm.
And I think that um, it's important to remind people there is going to be a level of discomfort, right? There's going to be a level of discomfort in recovery. The difference is using these techniques to help you recover, um, and the discomfort that you're going to feel is a temporary period of time.
Mhm.
It's the short term um, pain or discomfort for the long term recovery. And 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 I
Well,
think
and
people,
they're gonna be there anyway. Whether I mean,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So we
Yeah,
may as well
we may as
give it a
well
shot,
we may
right?
as well practice. And that's the
Mhm.
other word I use a lot, is we practice instead of testing, because I think we're constantly testing ourselves. Instead of testing, and that's that pressure, we can use this is that, I know this is challenging, but I often say every day we get up is the opportunity. We have this opportunity to practice these recovery tools or recovery techniques, whatever it
Mhm.
is that works for each individual. And we are going to be experiencing discomfort of sensations because we're no longer fighting them. And so there's that discomfort. And then there's a discomfort, I believe, of doing the opposite, because it feels so unfamiliar. Anytime we do anything new, the brain retracts. It's because it's not familiar. The brain likes to do things that are the same over and over and over again.
Right.
Believes there's safety in that. And even though we don't want these symptoms, right, and these sensations in our body, the brain, and tell me if I'm wrong, you know a lot about this. The brain thinks it's safer there in a sense because it's familiar.
Oh, sure. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, you don't have to look any further than, when someone's why do people who are perfectionists or fixers or, super structured, like I've got it all under control people, so much more likely to end up with these kinds of conditions
Yep.
because they have a much harder time just being like, oh, okay, there it is. This is where I am right now. They want to fix it. They have this drive,
This
this
urge.
this urge to fix it, right? And then of course, it makes it harder to put these techniques into practice.
Yeah, to fix it and fix it quickly,
It's got to
right?
happen right now.
And that leads
Mhm.
right into something I wanted to talk about today too. Is I'm just kind of thinking of ways that people get stuck in the
Mhm.
recovery. And another thing that I express to my clients or try to share with them and encourage them is it's not just what you're doing, it's how you're doing it.
Mhm.
So I have had clients that have a checklist of recovery. I get up and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And totally understand that. But what's the
yeah.
energy? Where is that coming from?
Yeah.
Right.
And
And
what
it's
message is that sending?
that exactly. And it's that internal pressure,
Mhm.
right? Which is probably the same pressure that preceded the events or contributed to acquiring the symptoms. And because it's a pattern that we've probably had as since childhood, maybe it's a protective pattern. Maybe it was a way to feel safe
Mhm.
when we were young, if there was, any type of stress or trauma. And we're not really conscious of how that's affecting our recovery. So it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. What is the energy behind your action? What is the emotion behind your action? Is it urgency, right? Is it pressure, right? Or is it acceptance? Like, this is where I am right now. I know
Mhm.
this is good for my nervous system, and this is what I'm going to do to help my nervous system feel safe. And I think for a lot of people that I've worked with, once they start to look at the nervous system perspective, like the safety, so rather than saying, oh, I need to get rid of these symptoms, I'm using these tools to help my nervous system.
Right. That's what it all comes down to,
Mm-hmm.
safety.
Yeah.
And that so maybe it's okay right now to seg into this, and of course, this could get personal, so you're welcome to share as little or as much as you'd like, but so you already knew all these techniques.
Mm-hmm.
I think it tripped you up that it was a new symptom. It was like,
Oh,
dizziness? No,
totally.
no way. No way
Yeah.
that this could be mind
That's
body.
totally
Pain
different.
stuff, totally
I'd rather,
different.
I even remember thinking, I'd rather have pain. I know what pain
Oh, I
is.
know. I know, I hear that from a lot of folks with
Mm-hmm.
dizziness.
Yeah.
I'd rather have anything but this. Well, that's why you have it, because
Yeah.
your brain is getting that fear message, right? So, well, what do you think has made you vulnerable? Is there something, do you think, that has made you vulnerable to having a second round or I guess a third or fourth round with a persistent mind body symptom?
For sure. I think my past childhood, complex trauma past
Mhm.
set my nervous system up, and definitely is a contributing factor
Mhm.
to chronic symptoms. And, there's probably still more work that I need to do within that element of processing some of the trauma that I've
Mhm.
had, from my childhood. And a lot of times those things there's not necessarily an end date to that. It's just sort of like, okay, so I've processed this part. Okay, well then there's this next part, and then there's this next part. So it's this ongoing work, which I'm totally okay with. And I've done already a lot of it.
And you had done a lot. And I'm curious though, did the dizziness spur you to kind of revisit some of that stuff and say, "Hmm, there may have been some stuff I need to go back and think about," or like what how did that affect your journey with
Um,
revisiting some of those
well,
situations?
that for sure. Ironically, it wasn't just that, it was actually this, which we'll talk about, the certification that I'm doing now, because we talk a lot about trauma in this certification. Um,
Mhm.
so, so that, but what it did do was remind me of what I learned when I had chronic pain is, and for me, this was a huge piece of it, taking care of myself, not taking care of myself.
Mhm.
Right. And I know that sounds really simplistic,
Oh,
but
no, I remember what was happening when you got sick.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember you wrote that in that email to me. Like I was taking care of my whole family. Your whole family had COVID.
Yeah.
And this was back when COVID wasn't, it was Delta, if I remember
And
correctly.
that was,
So,
yeah, that was a
so,
really rough one.
so it
Hmm.
was rough. They got sick. You were running around trying to take care of everyone. Then you got sick. And
Yeah.
wasn't it right around the holidays too? So there was
It
all that
was,
going
yeah, it
on.
was the end of October, beginning of, so it'll be almost a year, end of
Yeah.
October, beginning of November.
Yeah.
So, and that is, something that I continually need to work on is taking care of everyone else at the expense of myself.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest reminder. How does that connect to trauma? Well, that's what I learned. I need to take care of everybody else. That was people pleasing is for me, it was a coping mechanism, trying to keep the peace. If I just do this for everyone else, then everything will be okay. I'll feel safer.
Hmm.
When you grow up in an environment where you're taking care of a caregiver, right? You learn that as well. So, yes, these things do contribute. It doesn't mean it will happen if that was your experience, but they certainly contribute to the possibility of having persistent symptoms and, experiencing them again. I
Hmm.
do like to hear what Howard Schubiner has talked about this in terms of like another episode of persistent symptoms. He also just kind of says, that's part of the human experience too.
Hmm. It is.
It's part of the human experience. And so that helps me. Then I don't go right into, you should know, you're a
Hmm.
practitioner, Julie, you should know this. I mean, I'm human, right? So, that's a piece of it, but sure, I definitely look at that and go, there's still work I need to do. There's still
Right.
work I need to do. And that's okay.
Right. Well, and what I'm going to point a couple things out here for
Yeah.
people listening. First of all, full recovery is possible. Here she is. Okay.
Yep.
So if you're worried, oh, whatever it is that people are talking about, they still have sensations, they're not recovered. Obviously,
And it's not just
this
me,
it's
tons of
not just
people,
tons
tons
of
of people have
people,
recovered. Yeah.
but so that's totally possible. But I also want to point out there are these two parallel paths that don't always mirror each other exactly. I've been starting to say more frequently now, the only thing that's really required to get better from your actual symptoms is to not be afraid of them anymore, to turn down danger mode,
Yep.
essentially,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that you don't also have some other background work to do to make sure that you stay healthy in the long run and
Yep.
to not just to keep the symptoms away, but to ensure that your brain just kind of doesn't go back into danger mode that way again.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying is you were able to get yourself out of symptom world relatively
Yep.
quickly by practicing techniques, but
Yep.
there's still this parallel process of healing, reprocessing, growing as a person,
And
being human.
consistently, yeah, and consistently taking care of my nervous system,
Mhm.
which I sometimes treat myself as a machine,
Mhm.
right? I think
Oh,
that's a
yeah.
very relatable thing.
Mhm.
And when you're building a business, and you're the only one, you're the person to do everything, you can go back to those same patterns of treating yourself,
Mhm.
that way, and then not making yourself a priority. And so that's, to me, for myself, is the thing that I need to revisit the most and stay committed to, is taking care of Julie. And it can be really difficult to do that when you have a family and a business and
Mhm.
a new puppy, which we just got a puppy.
We did that too. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with us?
That was so, everyone's like, oh, animals are so regulating, super dysregulating
It
for
was
me.
it was so stressful. I mean, it's been so stressful. He's right here next to me snoring, but it's
Okay.
been so stressful. Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
it has.
Too
Yes.
funny. How long ago did you get your puppy?
We got her in May. I think it was
Okay.
May, end of May. So
So
she's
she's still a
seven. She's
puppy.
7 months.
Okay.
Yeah, she's 7 months, and she's amazing. It's a Cavalier King Charles
Oh
Spaniel.
my gosh, mine too.
No,
I
really.
swear we didn't plan this, everyone.
Oh my God, that's
He's
hilarious.
Benji's right next to me. He's actually 8 months. He was born in January. So,
Okay, February.
oh my gosh,
Hmm.
that's crazy. But he's a very chill dude.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
so he's a very chill dude, and I got him well, we got him about a month and a half ago. So
Okay,
he was a little bit older than
sure.
when you got yours.
Yes.
What's the name of your dog?
Rosie, and she's a
Rosie.
Ruby. She's a Ruby.
Oh,
She's super cute. They're the
they're
best. They are the
they're
best
just
breed.
amazing
Yeah,
dogs. I'm
they're a
like,
perfect breed. But
absolutely.
as
But yes,
regulating as
stress. Yes.
animals can be, they can also be dysregulating. So,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
okay. That's okay. So um I don't know, where were we? Where were we?
Well, actually, I know exactly where we were because I wanted to point something out. So what you're talking about here is that because of your past experiences, you have a tendency to snap back.
Yep.
I view it as like, it's just kind of the comfortable place where your nervous system was programmed to be when you were young. You want to
Yes.
snap back into people pleasing and
Yes.
similar patterns. So,
Yep.
a question I get often on my channel is, okay, I've identified this to be an issue.
Hmm.
How in the world do I stop doing it?
Mm.
So how have you done that, Julie? What's the process to not doing that
Not
anymore or
engaged.
not doing it as much?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is awareness. We can't change anything we aren't aware of, right?
Mhm,
Like you said, now I know, but really being aware in the moment. And
mhm.
sometimes the awareness comes after the fact.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I just said yes when I didn't want to,
Mhm,
right? And if that comes after the fact, then truly you have the option to go back and go, you know what, this isn't working out. This isn't going to work out for me.
mhm,
It's taking what it's really comes down to practicing one experience at a time. So once you have the awareness down and you're conscious that you're doing it, and there's an opportunity comes up where somebody asks you, if you're specifically talking about people pleasing, you know, uh, giving yourself that space to go, okay, I know I don't want to continue the same pattern of behavior. So what feels best to my nervous system in this moment?
mhm.
I always ask myself that a lot. How does my nervous system feel about this? Kind of tune in to, how is this
Your
feeling?
gut sense, like,
Yes.
because we
Yeah.
learn to ignore it and override it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like you're going to get, I'm still working. People pleasing is one of the most challenging things to unlearn.
Mhm,
And I believe when it's out there, people are, oh, just say no. And that can be so hard for people that have had a lifetime of saying yes. And so it's truly one experience at a time, keeping a small promise to yourself, like, I'm going to, if somebody invites me to something, or whatever the case may be, is really tuning in. Is this helping me? Is this something that's going to help me? Do I want to do this truly?
mhm, mhm,
And if you're in the moment where somebody asks you, um, on the spot, and you say yes because it's become this natural habit, to be able to go back and go, you know what, actually, it's not going to work out.
mhm,
um, Boundaries, creating boundaries. And that's truly challenging work. But I would say the majority of the people I work with, because I think we're all cut from a very similar cloth when we have persistent symptoms. I know John Sarno talks about the personality traits.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't, I don't like to call them personality traits. And I know some people might not like that because that
No, they
sounds
can be
fixed.
changed. Yes,
Yes,
they're flexible.
they're
They were
learned
programmed, they were
behaviors.
shaped.
Yes, they
Yes.
were learned behaviors. We were never
Yes.
born people pleasers or perfectionists. These are things
Yes,
that we've
correct.
learned probably out of necessity
Mhm,
when we were young. And now that we know we're not in danger and we're adults, we can start to unlearn some of those behaviors and creating those boundaries, one boundary at a time.
mhm,
One boundary. I was just working with a client recently who did that. And she just felt so much relief. It was one boundary of one experience. That's how we start to build that muscle, right?
mhm,
We start to build that neural pathway. And I think the other part of that, if we're talking about people pleasing, creating boundaries, is understanding there's going to be discomfort. There's going to be discomfort around that when we create that boundary and we say no. Expect there to be some discomfort for you
mhm.
internally, because guess what? It's another opposite action that you're doing. It's doing the opposite of a familiar pattern that you've always done. And there may be discomfort for the other person, and
Yeah.
being okay with that, because
Mhm.
that's truly not our responsibility, but we think it is. We think we need to be responsible for the emotions of other people, and it's not like we're going out and hurting people, but they we need to be responsible for ourselves and our
Yes.
emotions.
So what's the role then, or what's the place of looking backwards? So I love that you gave such actionable, like, here and now advice to people watching, because as you're saying, there are many people watching this interview who have very similar traits or really identify with you and your story from last time and your story from this time.
Yeah.
So taking it a step deeper though, so what's the role of looking back and looking back at what happened to us in childhood, looking back at traumas or difficult experiences or stressors? How does that fit into changing what we're doing right now?
Well, um, I think it's so important to look back and see why we
Mhm,
have these patterns of behavior today, to
mhm.
understand, to understand and not blame ourselves for them, because we
Mhm,
so easily criticize ourselves. "Oh, I'm doing it again, and da 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 da. And so we need an understanding first. Okay, these were born or learned out of um, their protective behaviors that we needed to have.
mhm.
Okay, and so once we understand that, we can offer ourselves a little bit of compassion. And then, right, then we can say, okay, now I no longer want to do this, or I want to
Mhm.
work toward not doing this as much. Um, what are some of my options for doing that? That might be getting help, working and processing some of these traumas from when you were a child, or whether that's with a caregiver or someone else, and and that then you decide who you want to work with. We talked a little bit before we even got on the call of the importance of working through the body, because that's where
Mhm.
trauma is stored. We hear all the time now, oh, trauma is a really big word everywhere. Like, you go
It's a
on
buzzword.
Instagram, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And I know there are even some people pushing back on using it too much, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Um, but if you have a history, right, where your nervous system was dysregulated, it didn't feel safe, you didn't have the ability, it was hard to cope, right? That is worth looking into
Mhm.
and figuring out what practitioner is best for you. I think it's important to see someone who is trauma informed, somebody that understands trauma. It can work somatically with you.
Right. Let's seg into that now, because I think when people think, "Oh, I have to go to therapy," they think talk therapy. So, why don't you share your views on why that might not be the best way for people to, again, as someone who is a trauma survivor yourself, someone who has had a long history of
Mhm.
unfortunately physical symptoms that have come along with that history.
Yeah.
What's your view on talk therapy and why that's not the best option?
Well, and there's a lot of pushback for talk therapy. I think it has its place. I
Mhm.
don't want to say, oh, this isn't, it's
Sure.
not useful, because I did traditional talk therapy from the age of 25, my first
Mhm.
panic attack. And it was cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mhm. Which it often
And
is.
it
Yep.
was super useful for me. I was
Mhm.
able to get out of a crisis.
Right.
What it didn't do was help me then unlearn some of the behaviors that I had that got me into the crisis in the first place. Okay. That's might take deeper work for some people.
Mhm. Mhm.
And and so I think it has its place. I think cognitive behavioral therapy is incredibly useful. It helped me. And then sometimes we need to go a little deeper, and we need to work on some of the experiences that we've had in the past at a somatic level,
What does that mean
through
for
through the
people who
body.
don't
So
know?
somatic,
Mhm.
so in through the body.
Mhm.
right? We need to work within the body. And what I share with my clients is what's so important about that. And I think this is pervasive. I don't know about the dizziness community, but it's pervasive in the chronic pain community. You are told all the time, tell yourself you're safe. And I don't know if
Right.
we talked about this on the last call, but that's all you hear. Tell yourself you're safe. And so I have clients who are like, I'm telling myself I'm safe. I'm telling
And
myself
I
I'm
don't
safe.
feel safe.
No, because your nervous system doesn't
Right.
speak cognitive language.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
In order to feel safe, it needs to come from the body. There's nothing wrong with saying I'm safe, but you need to pair it with some kind of somatic tool as well.
Right, right, and that's why one of the first things I teach people is breathing. Not that breathing is the only way, it's very simple. There are, of course, much more in-depth ways to do this, but that is a body-based message of safety, not a
Yes, one of
not
the
a cognitive
fastest
one.
ways to trigger that calming aspect of the parasympathetic nervous system.
Mhm,
And I agree, that's one of the first tools I teach too, is
mhm.
having some type of breath pattern. And I know breath pattern to a lot of people can feel boring, right?
Yeah.
But it's an essential piece. It's a
Mhm,
foundational piece, I think. And it's that understanding that we need to not only tell our brain and nervous system we're safe, but we need to show. We need to show and tell
mhm.
that we're safe. And for and there's a plethora of resources that we can use. And a lot of those resources, we have these general ones,
Mhm,
breathing, right?
mhm,
Somatic tracking,
mhm,
my accepting and allowing or
mhm,
releasing, purposely releasing tension from the
mhm,
body, moving
mhm,
at a slower pace.
mhm,
Because a lot of times when we're activated, we're moving really, really fast and we don't need to be, right?
mhm.
Those are, in addition to, a million different somatic tools, there's so many of them.
Mhm.
But then there's also personal resources too that we can utilize. So having a handful of both, like what does that mean? So for me, there's certain things that I know calm my nervous system. Floating in a body of water for me is very calming. Even being around a body of water is very
Mhm.
calming for my nervous system. Um, you know, uh, Ironically enough, just browsing in a store or around that's very regulated. For some people,
Mhm.
that's dysregulating. So, yes, for some people, that's just, for me, it's very regular. I can
Mhm,
relax.
mhm,
And so it's finding out what's personal to you, what
mhm,
helps you. Painting for some,
mhm,
being creative.
mhm.
And so there's so many different ways to help regulation. For
Right.
some people, they need to be outside in nature. They need to feel grounded in nature,
And I wanna
right?
be clear that no one's saying that you're gonna paint your way out of symptoms or you're going to walk in the woods and everything's gonna go away. This is not about addressing the symptoms head on because the symptoms aren't they're a symptom. They're a symptom of the problem. You're
Yep.
addressing the problem by doing this, and the problem is this nervous system danger mode, threat mode, alarm, however you wanna call it,
Yep.
doing those things and teaching your body to start to regulate itself is eventually how you're gonna get your way out of symptoms and make sure that you're not in symptoms again later.
Exactly. And ironically, it's usually those resources. That's exactly what the nervous system is asking for in terms of taking care of yourself, getting
Mhm,
back to taking care of myself. So for me, it was really this understanding that this is where my nervous system is. And at some capacity, there's a certain, you know, um, amount of stress that my nervous system can't handle. It's just like, I'm done.
mhm.
And so I need to make sure that I'm working within that, that
Mhm.
frame and understanding that. So there's a lot of learning about yourself that goes
Does that feel
on.
limiting? Does it feel like because I've heard people say things like, "I just wanna go back to living my old life. I could do
Mm,
all this stuff." And I feel so sad for people when they say that because 'cause I'm like, "But that's what got us into this problem in the first place. We can't our bodies aren't machines," like you were saying. So,
yeah.
how does that feel on the on your end of things? Does it feel limiting?
It doesn't, and it never did. To me, it was more like, oh, now I understand what my body's asking for. For me,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, oh, thank goodness I was finally listening. And there's a certain point where my body's like, no, we can't do this anymore. I can't work at that pace.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, I will do things purposely because when you don't have symptoms, it's easy, like we've talked about, to go back to the same patterns. Rushing and hurrying, that's a huge trigger for me. I do not like rushing. I do not like hurrying. And I will still find there are, of course, times when that's inevitable,
Right.
but most of the time it's not useful and or needs to, we need to go at that pace. And so I will purposely slow down in an environment where everyone else is rushing, like Target.
Mm-hmm.
I will purposely slow down
Mm-hmm.
to help my nervous system see it's safe. I don't need to do this
Mm-hmm.
because of the energy that's coming off of the environment I'm in, triggers my nervous system and gives me the urge to kind of go at the same pace.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but
No, you're
it's,
giving great practical tools that people.
yeah, it's learning what your nervous system needs. And then post recovery is maybe there's a change in how you're living day to day. You're purposely adding certain things every day that helps keep your nervous system
Right.
regulated.
And not in service of symptoms, but in
No,
service of actual self-compassion, of actually caring for
that's
yourself.
exactly it. And that there
Mhm.
you hit it right on the head. It's the self-compassion, and that we're so
Mhm.
lacking, right? Or we never learn to have as a young child or
Mhm.
even an adult. People feel guilty when they do things for themselves. Women feel guilty when they do things for themselves.
Mhm.
We live in a culture of produce, productivity, do more, do more, do more,
Mhm.
right? And give, give, give. And while there's nothing wrong with giving, you're not doing it at the expense of yourself, your health, right?
Mhm.
And so it's making sure that you're doing things every day that you know um, makes you feel good, and that's going to look different for everybody.
Mhm.
So for me, that looks like I have a period of time during the day where I need to be alone. Having time to myself is super important. That's one of the things I learned through this process is I need alone time. Nobody around me. I'm an introvert by nature, so that's how I, regain my energy is by
Mhm.
having alone time. This puppy has really
Oh,
not
I
been
hear
helpful
you.
in that. But aside from that, that's one thing that I need. I need to be alone, and honestly, since COVID, it's been challenging because my husband works from home. My son took online classes. My daughter was everyone was home all the time. And I was like, oh my gosh. So it's purposefully, intentionally doing those things for yourself,
Mhm.
right? We brush our teeth every day. We do. There's all kinds of things that we do all the time for
Mhm.
ourselves, and so it's making that promise to yourself. And I find when I'm not doing those things is when my nervous system is like, okay, Julie, and usually she taps me on the side of the shoulder
Yeah.
and it's like, remember me? And then I'll just kind of brush it off like we all do and then just keep going. And then it's a louder tap and a louder tap. And then all of a sudden I have a symptom.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, and you've seen that correlation. Again,
100%.
I'm asking that question because people are gonna say, "Well, if she still has occasional weird sensations, it's because, her brain is still messed up." No, you're seeing the direct relationship between your nervous system being starting to slide into that mode and the
Yeah.
symptoms themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm human, and so, we need to give ourselves more grace in terms of that. And, it's okay. It's okay. I can look at symptoms is kind of a baseline. Like if I'm starting to experience something, I'm like, okay, then this is my cue to step back and
Mhm.
give back to myself. I
Mhm.
don't want it to get to the point where it did with dizziness or chronic pain where I have to stop my whole life, you know? And so an ongoing lesson for me is take care of yourself, Julie.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
human. Sometimes I listen and sometimes I don't.
Mhm. But you're hearing the signals, and I tell people, I'm not saying, "Oh, this dizziness is so wonderful," and so, like you're supposed to be happy about it. Not that, but it's it's like it's like your brain learns a language of
Yep.
communication with you. It uses it to communicate with you, and when when you've learned the language and you've successfully navigated yourself out of the peak of your symptoms, your brain might still use that language to communicate with you every now and then.
Yep.
It may still jump into that, like when people don't uh, unless they've had migraine headaches, they don't usually think of headaches as, "Oh, my brain's talking to me."
Mm-hmm.
And they don't respond with so much alarm and fear if I say, "Oh, yeah, you have a tension headache." But that it's the same thing. Your brain may not use tension headaches. Your brain may use a dizziness sensation to say, "Hey,
Yep.
hey, hang on a second. What's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
There's something you need to address."
And usually when you ask somebody what was going on around the time of onset,
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah.
and if it wasn't around that time, it's just maybe a year and a half before that time,
Right.
or if that's not it, then they were already in this state of dysregulation,
Mhm.
and their nervous system was already stressed.
Mhm.
um, and and I think too, for a lot of us, at least for me, if somebody would have said in the first weeks, months of symptoms, you know, what is your body trying to tell you? I would
Oh,
have slapped somebody,
yeah.
or
I
I
try
mean,
not to say that. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
but it is true. It is true. Your body is trying to talk to you, right? It is true. It takes a little while to get to that point to be
Mhm.
able to really tune in and listen. And part
Mhm.
of that is because we're in so much fear and panic.
Mhm.
It's hard to like slow down and go, oh wait, what is my body trying to say? And that's why recovery can be so transformative for a lot of people.
It is.
It's because they've it's this this trauma. And when we talk about trauma isn't just what happened in our past. Trauma is actually what's happening when we have persistent symptoms. Then there's medical trauma involved in that as well.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Wow. I'm so glad you went there, Julie, because first of all, of course, there are many of my viewers had previous medical trauma before they got dizzy. But then there is a traumatic component just to having to deal with the symptoms themselves. So it's kind of
Yep.
this ongoing sensitization process. So it's no matter
Yes.
what happened before, now you're in a situation where you're stuck with these terrifying symptoms, and your brain is if you don't find a way to interrupt that cycle, the brain is continuing to sensitize to them,
Yep.
to be more aware of them, to be more alert towards them.
Yeah. And I think we forget that chronic symptoms in and of themselves are traumatic
Mhm.
for most people.
Mhm.
For most people. I never want to generalize, but for most people they are.
Yeah.
And we focus a lot on what happened to get us to this point, but we also need to acknowledge that this in and of itself is traumatic. And the symptoms and the just the process of trying to figure out what's wrong with you.
So how do you work
um,
through that then? Because I've had people ask me that. So can we first of all, can we call it for what it is, right? Which we just did. But how do you again, I think sometimes again, trauma is thought of as this like deep mystical or very specific thing that happens. It's an event, and then you go back and process it somehow in some kind of magical therapy ritual or something. So
mhm.
in the moment, how do you deal with that? How do you work through it?
um, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think for me, it wasn't useful. I think I was more focused on what do I need to do to help my nervous system when I was in the moment,
Mhm.
right? I don't think I even realized the amount of trauma that I experienced until after I was in, or, becoming or recovering or close to the end of recovery.
I
I
think,
didn't,
but you had agency. I think
yes.
that's the differentiator. So you, not to belittle anyone's experience, but
Mm-mm.
afterwards you're like, I got myself out of this. I regulated my way out of this. And
Yes.
and so that changes, again, it doesn't change the situation, but it does change how your brain interprets it moving forward. So trauma isn't only about the experience. It's about what your brain decides to do with the experience afterwards. Does it then make you fearful, avoidant, have this huge nervous system response? Or is it, wow, that's something that happened to me that was awful and I don't want to be there again, but I've grown. There's a post-traumatic growth versus
Yes.
post-traumatic stress. And one of the big differentiators is agency. Do you feel like there's something you can do about it? Do you feel like you have some power to change what's happening to you? And I think that's why people like my channel because
Yeah.
I'm sending the message, yeah, there is something you can do about it. Now it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be perfect. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't give you a timeline, but you are not powerless. You are not just sitting there waiting for the doctor to give you an injection to fix you. This is, again, that can be scary, but in other ways, it's empowering. It gives you agency,
Super
right?
empowering. Super
Right?
empowering. Yeah. I know recovering from anxiety, OCD, chronic pain, and now dizziness. I mean, it builds that resilience,
Hmm.
like you said, that post traumatic growth
Hmm.
and that empowerment. Like I can do hard things,
Hmm.
and I figured it out myself.
Hmm.
I mean, truly with the chronic pain, because there. I mean, that was so many years ago, and there wasn't a lot out there at the time, and I had to kind of piecemeal things together, and so that was, to me, that was a huge had a huge impact on my life. Huge,
Hmm.
enormous impact, not just physically and emotionally, but spiritually as
Hmm.
well. And what's interesting about that is when I had dizziness, I there is empowerment knowing, okay, I know what I need to do, but there was also some pressure because Julie, you're a practitioner, you should be
You
able to figure
shouldn't.
this out.
Yes.
This shouldn't
Oh,
have
I hear you.
happened. And so I really needed to work on that
Hmm.
voice too.
Hmm.
But yeah, incredibly empowering if we allow it to be.
Right.
If we
That
allow it to
is
be.
such a good point. And I know I interrupted you there, so I'm sorry. I
Oh,
just
no, no,
got so
no, no.
excited about what you were saying because I was like, that's what she's saying. It doesn't change the facts of how awful it was. It was awful. It was the worst thing ever. You wouldn't wish it
Oh,
on your worst enemy.
no,
And
no.
we can't change that, but we can change what your brain and nervous system decide to do with that information
Yep.
afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it can change the trajectory of your life in the best way possible.
Mm. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like we should stop talking like right now and leave people with that. But before we close, I just wanted to give you the opportunity, Julie, to just share. I know you've been working really hard over the last 9 months, not just on your recovery, but on expanding your toolbox to help
Yes.
people. Did you want to share just
Yes.
a little bit about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I have been working kind of in the back end of my business. I am completing a really amazing, but also very arduous certification
Yeah.
in emotional freedom technique, or tapping.
Hmm.
If you're not familiar with tapping, I like, everyone has a million different definitions for tapping. Some people just say it's a stress relieving tool. It can help process trauma. I call it's another resource to help regulate your nervous system,
Bingo.
where
Yeah.
you're tapping on meridian points like acupuncture, acupressure points in your body, while you're doing some exposure and talking or using
Hmm.
statements,
Hmm.
that really discuss what you're going through and how you're feeling. So it's a somatic exercise. It's also a cognitive exercise.
Hmm.
To me, it's it's an incredible resource to help calm the nervous system. A lot of people say you can feel better faster. It's true. I think it's very comparable to using somatic tracking
Hmm. Hmm.
in that. And, people use it for chronic symptoms. They use it for anxiety, for trauma, can help process trauma. The certification I'm going through is actually clinical EFT, which means it's proven through clinical trials.
Hmm.
And how I will use it moving forward, we will see. But in addition to completing that certification, and that should be happening within the next month, I'm also creating a new program for recovery from chronic pain, and that hoping to be launched after the first of the year.
Hmm.
And it's going to be a little different. I've been working one-on-one with people for a number of years, and I want to be able to expand that to more people at a more affordable rate. And so I'm going to be putting together a self-paced program
Hmm.
that will allow me to do that. There will be a community aspect to it. It'll be
Hmm.
geared toward women.
Hmm.
That's always been my niche is women. That goes back to the, me making literally in the middle of my suffering a promise for me, God, whoever your higher power is, that I will, if I can get through this, I will help other women do the same. And so I am going to be working on that, over the next several months after I complete practitioner training. And
Mm.
again, hopefully that'll be launched, after the first of the year sometime. So
Oh, wonderful. Well, I will certainly include your website. People can sign up for your newsletter on your
they can
website,
sign
right?
up for my newsletter, and there's also a sign up to be the first to know, when the program is launched.
Hmm.
So, which is basically signing up for the newsletter. That's how I'll let people know first. Those people will be the people that sign up for the newsletter will be the first to know about the program. So,
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'll
yeah.
include that in the video description. So please, again, I actually have several clients who've signed up for your newsletters, even though they don't have chronic pain, because they find you so reassuring. They just love getting
Oh, thank you.
you had a letter on there, like a sample letter that you wrote to yourself.
Yes.
And I got there was buzz about that in my membership community because they loved it. They're like, I've just
Oh,
needed to see an example of what this looks like. And now I get it. Now I understand. So anyway, I highly recommend it, even if you're not
oh,
suffering
that's
from
so
chronic pain.
kind.
Yeah.
Well, I love to hear that. And, and I'm glad that what I share is helpful for even just one person. I mean, isn't that why we're here?
Yeah,
Isn't that why
it
we're
is.
here?
It is.
Right.
It
And
is.
that's why we keep coming back to this. That's why we keep
Mhm.
doing this. That's it, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you again so much for being so generous with your time and sharing
Oh, well,
the
thank you.
follow-up.
You and I connected immediately, and I'm just so grateful that I found you, and how excited I was that you are familiar with, the TMS community
Yeah.
and Ellen Gordon. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this. And
Yes.
you are a beacon of light in
Oh.
this dizziness recovery community. Truly, you are, because I've been in the groups. I've been in those
Oh, I
recovery
know, it's so
groups, and
scary and
there's so
sad.
much
Yeah.
suffering.
Yeah.
And to know that you can share your knowledge, not even, as an audiologist, right? But beyond that,
Oh, far beyond that at this point. Yeah.
far beyond that,
Yeah.
to help people get to recovery and, beyond that as well, too. I mean, it's just, you're doing
Thank
amazing
you.
work.
My
And
gosh,
so
thank
I'm
you.
appreciative.
It's it feels like I was supposed to be doing this on it.
Yes.
It feels like it just doesn't it just kind of happened. And I just keep going with it.
Yeah.
So
It happened
just,
upon you. And isn't that how it
yeah.
works too? It really
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I always direct people to you.
Well,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. The love and admiration is mutual, and now we have matching dogs too. I mean, it just
I know they could
it's just
be,
meant to be.
yes, they could be boyfriend, girlfriend. Well, not right
Yes.
now, though.
Right. Not right now. They're a little young for that. We'll let them grow up first. All
Oh,
right. Well,
I love
thank you,
it. Yeah, we'll have to
Julie.
share pictures in an email.
Oh, we will. We
Okay.
will. And if anyone wants a dog tax, just let me know. I can make that happen on YouTube.
I
All
love
right.
it.
All right. Thank you
All
so
right.
much,
Yes.
Julie. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for all your time. And again, guys, visit Julie's website to sign up for her newsletter and to get more information on her services. All right.
Great.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Nice to see you. Take care.